Theodore stepped forward, but his flashlight suddenly went out, plunging the room into pitch darkness. Only faint outlines of furniture could be seen in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. In the distance, whispers could be heard, quiet but insistent, as if a multitude of voices were conversing. Allison felt an icy touch on her hand, as if someone invisible was trying to hold her back.
"We need to get out of here,"
she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Theodore turned the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge, as if it was locked from the other side. He pushed harder, but the door remained unyielding. Trying to stay calm, he pushed again but felt no give.
"Someone or something doesn't want us to leave,"
Theodore said, feeling his heart race. He turned to Allison, but she was no longer where he thought she was. The light suddenly came on, but not from his flashlight. Candles lit up the ceiling, seemingly appearing from nowhere. Allison stood in the center of the room, surrounded by candles, but she looked as though she was in a trance. The room suddenly illuminated with a faint light. Candles had appeared on the ceiling, as if from nowhere. Allison stood in the center, surrounded by candles, her eyes fixed on one point. She seemed not to notice Theodore or the surrounding environment.
"It's somehow connected to my family,"
she said, staring at one point ahead of her, as if someone was there.
"My parents. They knew something terrible was happening here, but they couldn't stop it. They knew about the evil,"
she said quietly, but her voice carried confidence.
"They tried to study dark forces to understand how they affect people, but they couldn't handle it."
Theodore tried to approach her, but something invisible pushed him back. He fell, hitting the wall, and felt blood dripping from his lips. The light began to flicker, and then the walls started cracking, as if the room itself was coming alive.
"Allison, wake up!"
he shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of cracking walls. The ceiling began to slowly descend, as if trying to crush them. Theodore saw shadows beginning to move, taking on the shapes of old portraits hanging on the walls. The faces on these portraits looked distorted, their eyes following every move. He realized that Allison's words about her parents weren't just a story. They had tried to study dark forces to unravel the mystery of curses, but they couldn't do it.
"We shouldn't have come here,"
Allison whispered, slowly raising her head, her eyes now dark, as if she wasn't herself anymore. Suddenly, a shadow appeared behind her, resembling the silhouette of a man with long hair. He looked at Theodore with disdain, his eyes gleaming with a grim light. The dark robe hid his body, but from beneath it, thin arms and legs were visible, testifying to his brief and torturous life. When he appeared, the room was immediately filled with the smell of old, stale blood and damp earth. This ghost was the owner of the house in the distant past, when he was still alive. He lived in an era when people treated the mentally weak with contempt and cruelty, and as a result, he became an outcast mocked by all. After his mother's death, who was his only support and protection, he found himself in absolute solitude. The tears he shed over her grave soon became drops of despair that eroded his sanity. Each day, his bitterness and hatred towards those who wronged him grew. Eventually, his despair reached its peak, and he decided to end his life, believing it to be the only way to end the pain and find peace. But peace never came. His spirit remained trapped within the walls of this house. His anger and bitterness only grew after death. He became someone even the bravest villagers feared, someone whispered about in the night. His anger turned into a hunger for revenge, and he vowed to pursue anyone who dared to enter his house. Every night he wandered through the house, his long hair dragging across the floor, creating a barely audible rustling sound. He watched those who came into the house and quietly whispered his curses into their ears, instilling fear and discomfort. He would appear before them at the most unexpected moments, making them feel his presence, his heavy breath, and the touch of his cold fingers. When the shadow appeared behind Allison, she felt the same coldness that everyone who had ever encountered him felt. His rage and hatred were directed at those who dared disturb his house, and he relentlessly pursued them until they either left or met their end. This was a spirit that would never rest. His anger was eternal. His presence was a reminder that the evil dwelling within the walls of this house couldn't be defeated. It could only be endured.
"This is my fault,"
Theodore said, trying to get up.
"I shouldn't have. But I thought I could help."
But the shadow merely shook its head, as if knowing that no one could help. Theodore tried to approach closer, but the shadow transformed into a large black mass that enveloped Allison, seemingly absorbing her. She tried to fight, but her strength failed, and soon she vanished into the darkness. Theodore, feeling horror and helplessness, eventually made his way out through a broken window. But the air outside was heavy, as if the night itself pressed down on him, as if an invisible force was pushing him toward the exit. Outside, he stopped, trying to understand what to do next. He glanced back at the house, but it already looked different, more sinister, more massive, as if it was gaining strength. Theodore knew that Allison was now part of this place, and no one could save her. The house craved her fear and pain, and it got what it wanted. Allison disappeared, and the house seemed to have erased any trace of her existence. The night air outside felt cool, but he couldn't catch his breath. Theodore vowed he would come back, but he knew his life would never be the same. The house would still be there, absorbing souls of those who dared disturb its peace. It was a place where evil ruled unchallenged, and no one could escape its grasp. He felt that perhaps he was destined to share Allison's fate, and the curse of the house would forever haunt his mind. The story ended in tragedy, and despite all efforts, Theodore knew that the evil dwelling in this house wouldn't disappear with the departure of one person. Each day the house grew stronger, and its victims only confirmed its sinister nature. Theodore realized that he couldn't escape his fate, and that the house would always wait for those who dared to violate its grim tranquility. If you liked the story, subscribe and like to hear the next part, and many other Nightmare Chronicles.